Leviticus 25, retold as a story in everyday language. The Israelites were still camped at Mount Sinai. They hadn't entered the Promised Land yet, but God was already preparing them for what life would look like once they arrived. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Tell the people this. When you finally enter the land I am giving you, don't forget that the land belongs to me. Because it belongs to me, even the ground deserves a Sabbath." God explained that for 6 years, they were free to live life as farmers. They could plant their fields, prune their vineyards, care for their crops, and gather the harvest. They would work hard and enjoy what the land produced. But when the 7th year comes, God said, everything changes. That year they were not to plant new crops. They were not to prune their vineyards. They were not to treat it like a normal farming year at all. Even if grain sprouted on its own from last year's seeds, or grapes naturally appeared on neglected vines, they were not to harvest them as a regular crop. The 7th year was to be a complete year of rest for the land, because it was dedicated to the Lord. That didn't mean no one could eat. Whatever the fields naturally produced would become food for everyone. The owner of the land could eat it. Servants could eat it. Hired workers could eat it. Foreigners living among them could eat it. Even their livestock and the wild animals would feed from what the land produced naturally. During that year, the land wasn't meant to make anyone rich. It simply provided enough for everyone. Then God told Moses about an even greater event that would happen only once every 50 years. "Begin counting," God said. "Count 7 cycles of Sabbath years. 7 years. 7 times. 49 years in all. Then, on the 10th day of the 7th month, the Day of Atonement, the priests were to blow the ram's horn throughout the entire country. The sound of that trumpet would announce the beginning of something extraordinary. The 50th year would be called the Year of Jubilee. It would be set apart as holy. Throughout the entire land, freedom would be proclaimed. Families that had lost their inheritance because of poverty would receive it back. Every person would return to the property originally given to his family. Every person who had been separated because of financial hardship would return home to his relatives. Just like the Sabbath year, no one was to plant crops or harvest the fields as a business during the Year of Jubilee. They would simply eat whatever the land produced naturally, because the year itself was holy. God repeated it so there would be no confusion. In the Year of Jubilee, every man shall return to his own possession. Because of that rule, buying and selling land worked differently in Israel than it did anywhere else. God explained, "If you buy land from your neighbor or sell land to him, don't cheat each other." No one was actually buying the land forever. They were really buying however many harvests remained until the next Jubilee. If many years remained before Jubilee, the price should be higher, because the buyer would receive more harvests. If only a few years remained, the price should be lower, because there were fewer harvests left. Everything was to be priced fairly. God warned them, "Do not take advantage of one another. Fear your God, because I am the Lord your God." Then he gave them a promise. "If you obey my laws and keep my commands, you will live safely in the land." The land would produce plenty of food. They would eat until they were satisfied. They would live there securely. God knew what they would be thinking. What if we don't plant during the 7th year? What are we supposed to eat? So he answered their question before they even asked it. "I will command my blessing on the 6th year." The 6th year's harvest would be so abundant that it would produce enough food for 3 years. They would have enough to eat during the Sabbath year, enough while they planted again in the 8th year, and enough to continue eating until the harvest of the 9th year came in. Then God reminded them of something they should never forget. The land must never be sold permanently. Why? Because the land is mine. The Israelites were living in God's land as his guests and caretakers. Since he was the true owner, every piece of land had to remain connected to the family he originally assigned it to. If a man became poor and had to sell part of his family's property, his nearest relative was supposed to step in and buy it back if possible. If there was no relative able to do that, but later the man became financially successful himself, he could calculate how many years remained until Jubilee, repay the buyer for those remaining years, and recover his property. But if he never became able to repay it, the buyer could keep using the land until the Year of Jubilee. Then, without exception, the property returned to its original family. God also gave special rules for houses. If someone sold a house inside a walled city, the seller had 1 full year to buy it back. If the year passed without redeeming it, the buyer owned it permanently. It would not return during Jubilee. But houses in villages without walls were treated differently. Since they were connected to farmland, they could always be redeemed and would return to the original owner during Jubilee. The Levites had special protection because they had no tribal territory like the other Israelites. If a Levite sold a house in one of the Levite cities, he could redeem it at any time. Even if he didn't, the house automatically returned during Jubilee because the Levite cities were their inheritance. However, the pasture lands surrounding their cities could never be sold because those lands permanently belonged to them. Next, God turned his attention to the poor. If your brother becomes poor and cannot support himself, help him. Whether he was a fellow Israelite, a foreign resident, or someone living among them, they were to support him so he could continue living. God specifically forbade taking advantage of someone's hardship. Do not charge him interest. Do not lend money expecting to profit from his desperation. Do not sell him food at inflated prices simply because he has no other choice. Instead, fear God. Remember who brought you out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God who rescued you from Egypt, gave you the land of Canaan, and became your God. Then God described another difficult situation. Suppose an Israelite became so poor that he sold himself to another Israelite to work off his debts. God said, do not treat him like a slave. Instead, treat him like a hired employee or a temporary resident. He would work only until the year of Jubilee. When Jubilee arrived, he and his children were to leave and return to their own family and to the land their ancestors had inherited. God explained why. The Israelites are my servants. I brought them out of Egypt. Since they already belonged to God, no Israelite had the right to permanently own another Israelite. Do not rule over him harshly. Instead, fear your God. God then addressed servants from the surrounding nations. If Israelites acquired male or female servants from neighboring peoples, or from foreign families living among them, those servants could become permanent members of the household and could be passed on as an inheritance to future generations. But once again, God drew a clear distinction. You must never rule harshly over your fellow Israelites. Finally, God described one last possibility. Suppose a foreigner living in Israel became wealthy while an Israelite became poor enough to sell himself to that foreigner. Even then, God said, the Israelite was not without hope. After he was sold, he still had the right to be redeemed. His brother could redeem him. His uncle could redeem him. His cousin could redeem him. Any close relative could redeem him. If he later earned enough money himself, he could even buy back his own freedom. The redemption price had to be calculated fairly. They would count how many years remained until Jubilee, and the price would reflect only those remaining years of service, just as though the man had simply been hired as a worker. If many years remained, the redemption price would be higher. If only a few years remained, it would be lower. While he worked, the foreign owner was forbidden to rule over him harshly, especially in the sight of the Israelites. And if no one redeemed him before then, the year of Jubilee settled the matter. When Jubilee came, he and his children would go free. God ended the chapter by reminding Israel of the reason behind every one of these commands. The children of Israel are my servants. They are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. The heart of Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25 is about far more than farming or property laws. It reveals God's heart for a society built on trust, justice, mercy, and restoration. The land rested because it belonged to God. Families were restored because God did not want poverty to become permanent. Debts did not erase a person's dignity. Hard times did not cancel a family's future. The poor were to be helped, not exploited. Business was to be fair, not greedy. Workers were to be treated with dignity, not cruelty. And every 50 years, the sound of a trumpet reminded the entire nation that God is a God who restores what has been lost, gives freedom where there has been bondage, and never forgets the people he has redeemed.